Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we recap the Norfolk Tides, rounding out our minor league recap series. We look back at the highs and lows of the Orioles AAA affiliates 2025 season. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, we want to start off with the Orioles announcing their postseason awards for the 2025 season for player development. Now, these are separate from our own awards, which we're going to announced in an episode later on this week. But this is something we always like to talk about each year when the Orioles give out these awards. The top minor league player as chosen by the Orioles this year is outfielder Nate George, while Trey Gibson wins pitcher of the year. And I think that Gibson's winning this award is not a surprise at all, given his success over the last few months. But George is an interesting choice for player of the year. The one thing, though, to note is that if you look at the candidates who spent all season in the minor leagues, you're really only looking, in my mind, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about this, a two-person race between Nate George and Aaron Estrada. Now, there have been times in the past that the Orioles have given these awards to players who have spent at least a portion of the season in the major leagues, but in general, it kind of feels like a preference that they don't give out the awards to players who are in the major leagues, which probably explains why Samuel Basallo or Dylan Beavers did not get this award. But credit to Nate George for a fantastic season, which we'll talk about a little bit here and on our episode later this week. But Nick, I'll start with you. I know these are not our awards, but I know our listeners pay attention to them. They care about them. We follow them year in and year out. What are your thoughts on George and Gibson as the Orioles honorees this year?
Yeah, I think the Jim Palmer Award going to Gibson was a lock. Like, we're going to reference a lot of great pitching performances in our own award segment, and maybe even some in the Norfolk segment as we recap the Tide season. But we could do 3 hours on just the good pitching performances this year. But Gibson, not to go into too much detail because I'm sure he's going to get some honors later on again, but top strikeout arm in the system. At least raw strikeout totals, I think he had 166, which led the way. Established himself, in my opinion, at least, as the top pitching prospect in the organization as of right now, and hopefully he can translate that to the big league success next year. The Nate George pick, yeah, that was definitely shocking, but I guess not really if you think about it, because if you're excluding Basallo and Beavers, then yeah, like you said, Estrada stood out. Maybe you make a case for Austin Overn. Not a whole lot. Nobody separated themselves statistically. But as far as player development is concerned, Nate George was obviously pretty huge this year. So I feel like the Orioles, and not to take anything away from Nate George here in winning this, he totally deserved it. But you have to imagine though that the organization feels pretty good being able to roll out hey, we're known for producing our hitters. Here's a teenager who we drafted in the 16th round last year. And in his first year, he is our minor league player of the year. So yeah, I think that's all around good. Just another opportunity to showcase Nate George there. But yeah, 3 levels, first pro year. He definitely earned that, and it's cool to see.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise for sure, especially because Basallo seems like the slam dunk choice, but then he got his prize by getting a 9-year contract, I suppose. He did have a 151 WRC plus in AAA over 321 plate appearances. And then if not him, Beavers had a 153 WRC plus over 418 plate appearances in AAA. But again, I guess he's eligible for the Rookie of the Year next year. He's making big league money. So like you said, it's between Estrada and George, and between high A and double A. Estrada had a 135 WRC plus in 443 plate appearances, and George had a 159 WRC plus over 370 plate appearances between the FCL low A and high A. George a year younger than Aaron Estrada. I don't know. It's a tough call. It's a really tough call, but I think it's a cool thought to give it to George just because, like Nick said, yeah, he has certainly come out of nowhere. Great development story, success story for the late round pick, and to become probably a top 100 prospect in baseball at some point in 2026. It's a nice nod to him for sure. And then for Trey Gibson, yeah, I think it was the the obvious pick, mostly because he's the guy that had the most success and was the most healthy all at the same time. Other guys obviously flashed here and there or had some shorter stints on the injury list, but Gibson was able to do it and at AAA on the doorstep of the majors. So hats off to him. I think it's well deserved for both guys.
Yeah, with George, I think that if you're going to look at players who spent the whole season in the minor leagues, and again, I don't know that that is the criteria for the Orioles, but I do think it's a preference based on some of the recent winners. You know, you can go back to 2022 when they went with Jordan Westburg over Gunnar Henderson. That's an example that jumps out in my mind. If you're going to look at players who not only spent the full season in the minors, but in the case of Basayo and Beavers, didn't have over a month in the major leagues at the end of the season, I think George is absolutely a great choice. And, you know, if you want to highlight the work of your player development staff, I can't really think of a better instance than picking a teenager who was not getting a lot of hype coming into the season, basically getting little to no coverage nationally that I saw, and putting up a great season across three levels and looking like a five-ish tool player along the way. And there's not a lot of position players in the Orioles system right now that have that kind of profile. And George will probably start next season at high A and probably be primed for another big year.
Yeah, I'm trying to look too and see if like anyone else was justifiable here. And I mean, in terms of like, you want to highlight a prospect, right? So it's like VML Machine had a good year, but you're not going to give it to him. TT Bowens, Reed Trimble, they had good years, but like they're going to also use this to highlight, like you said, the player development. And yeah, so in that instance, I do think Nate George was a right pick here, a good pick. Again, if you're excluding Basayo and Beaver. So yeah, it's just unfortunate. I think some of the other guys, just injuries, some of the other guys that could have competed for this, like Enrique Bradfield Jr. missing a big chunk of the year and such, just injuries as a whole wiping out a lot. But at least on the pitching side, I think Gibson was the runaway winner, but like there's definitely right behind him. I think, as we'll get into when we talk about our own awards, like picking like a number 2 and a number 3, there's a group of like 5, 6, 7 guys you could choose from. So still overall a pretty good year. Again, don't want to take anything away from George. Don't want to make it sound like this is a down year or anything. But yeah, strong performances.
Let's jump in now to our recap of the Norfolk Tides season. Tim Federowicz was a manager of this Tides squad that finished the season 63-84. And while there were some struggles along the way, we also saw some positives from individual performances. And like we do with all of our recaps, we're going to look at the hitting and pitching side of the equation and break these players down a little bit. I want to start with the hitters because this is where the bigger name guys came through, specifically Samuel Basayo and Dylan Beavers. Basayo played 76 games with the Tides this year, hitting 270 with a 966 OPS and 23 home runs, all the while not facing a pitcher younger than him at the AAA level. Meanwhile, Beavers in 94 games with Norfolk hit 304 with a 934 OPS, 18 home runs. He also walked 68 times while striking out just 76 times in 418 plate appearances. Both of those players ended up playing their way to the big leagues and getting substantial playing time when they joined the Orioles in August. And in the case of Basayo, getting a long-term contract extension along the way. And I think in the case of Beavers, definitely solidifying himself in the Orioles outfield plans for 2026. So this, if you want to look at the highlight of the Tides roster this season, I think you can start with these two guys. And Bob, it was interesting to see the progression for both players this year. Beavers got off to a little bit of a slow start, then caught fire and never slowed down. Basayo himself got off to a little bit of a slow start, had an injury that cost him time, but when he was back and fully healthy, picked up and just dominated from there.
Yeah, and Beavers, his slow start was like literally 5 to 10 games. Like it was not very long at all, less than 2 weeks. And yeah, clearly put in some really solid work over the offseason. It did seem like they were pretty high on him in spring training just because he got into a lot of games. I feel like he was there starting games. He was on the spring training roster longer than I would have expected him to be based on his 2024 numbers, seemed like he was performing pretty well as well. So I was trying to keep an eye out for him. Then he got off to that slow start for a while, but then after that, I mean, everything just clicked into place, and you see the player that's put himself into a top 100 list for all three of the lists to make him eligible for the Rookie of the Year PPI draft pick in 2026. Got to think with his performance, the way he's flashed here early in his career, he's going to be one of the front runners for Rookie of the Year, I would imagine, along with Basayo. So love that for him. Definitely some gaffes on defense here and there, but I think he's even improved in that regard. His fielding looks better to me from the eye test. Yeah, he's just great at bats, takes a lot of pitches, takes a lot of walks, good plate discipline, but not afraid to pop one here and there. Even much better against left on left. But then Basayo, yeah, he had a little bit of a slow start too, but man, when he is hot, I don't know if there's anyone, at least in 2025 in minor league baseball, that's as dangerous as he was this season, because he was hitting the ball hard with authority in the air, with frequency. 20 years old, turned 21, right? Not too long ago. So just a special kid at the time of this recording. He was just hit in the hand/wrist area and didn't look good. So hopefully he's fine, or at least not too bad, even if he has to miss the rest of the week here for the season. But man, just huge breakouts. We knew Basayo was coming. I think that's the one we saw from a mile away, from years away. So that was nice to see. But the Dylan Beavers thing was definitely a surprise to me, and a pleasant one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're hoping that Beavers is going to turn things around. You understand that this is a project, and his hitting development being chronicled, but to see him to come out of the gate slow, like we talked about, that strikeout rate was what, 40 something percent, just not hitting the ball. And I feel like it might have been specifically like a series when they went to Omaha. Didn't he have like 2 home runs in a game? I think it was like 2 home runs in like his first 2 at bats or something. I feel like that was probably one of the bigger sparks he had this year. It was just an insane season down there in AAA. And yeah, just to see him, I mean, to talk about the major league side of things, did he hit one of his 3 home runs? Didn't they come off a lefty already at the big league level?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It did. So he's got a left on left home run. He's always been, he went 2+ years without hitting a home run off a lefty in the minor leagues, but he hit for a good average and continued to get on base against lefties. It's not that he can't hit lefties. He absolutely can. He's just never shown any power against lefties. So good to see him get that one in the big leagues. A 134 WRC plus in your first 30 big league games. It was a real breath of fresh air for Beavers. Yeah, Basayo, the numbers aren't strong. He's a young kid getting adjusted and being thrust behind the plate probably a little bit more than the Orioles had planned to do with him, and probably what he was prepared for, even though I'm sure based on what we know about his personality, he embraced that challenge. But it was still probably not the game plan. And so, yeah, the numbers don't pop, but he got that extension. That's where all the excitement was. With Beavers, I'll gladly take this play. I mean, the walks have translated. He's walking at a near 20% clip in this range. Like, yeah, you found yourself a corner outfielder out there for sure. Which is, yeah, did not see this type of season coming either for Beavers. And you figure maybe a platoon guy, and maybe he still is like strong side of platoon and only predominantly faces right-handers. But the breath of fresh air was that there really was no adjustment period in the big leagues. He came up, and from the jump, he kind of is taken off. And so that was based on the long history of hitters and how they're performing when they come up to the big leagues for the Orioles. Considering Dylan Beavers was one of the first ones to hit like this from the jump and sustain it, is one, pretty surprising, but also very welcoming.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to come into this season assuming Heston Kjerstad is going to establish himself as a corner outfielder. He is a complete bust this year. I think there are obviously extenuating circumstances because he has completely disappeared from the map. They haven't given an update, but it's just nice to be able to say, man, for the first time, really, we have one of these guys come up and not perform. but then you have someone that kind of comes out of nowhere and can take his place as leaving this season, as assuming he's going to be one of the, at least play a role on the corner outfield. I mean, maybe they'll make some upgrades and give him a little more protection, but yeah, it's a great thing.
I want to shift over to a guy that's also been contributing in the major leagues over the last couple months, and that's Jeremiah Jackson. Now, if you listened to our Chesapeake recap last week, you probably noticed that we didn't talk about Jeremiah Jackson. And if we did, it was very brief. And that's because Jackson started the year at AA, and he was fine. He was a steadying presence at shortstop in what was otherwise, with other than him and Creed Willems, a lineup that was riddled with injuries and where the guys that were healthy were struggling. He ends up getting promoted to AAA, and it's like, all right, that was interesting to see Jackson do fine at AA, but is it really going to sustain itself at the next level? And turns out he was actually a much better hitter at AAA this season than he was at AA. 40 games with the Bay, 45 games with the Bay Sox, he had a 93 WRC plus. In 40 games with the Tides, that figure went all the way up to 182, and it came alongside a 377 batting average, 400 on base percentage, and 673 slugging percentage. It earned him a promotion to the major leagues, where in his time with the Orioles, I think he has done everything that he can do to show that he belongs on this roster next year, barring some big acquisition for a utility player, which I don't see happening this offseason. So this was, to me, one of the more interesting breakout stories that flew under the radar throughout the year because, Nick, I'll go back to you here because you kept pointing this out. When you looked at Jeremiah Jackson's StatCast card in AAA, all of the offensive metrics were either in the red, which means they were elite, or they were in the blue, which means they were pretty low percentile. There was no middle ground with Jeremiah Jackson. But credit to him because he hit his way to the major leagues this year, having most of that success at Norfolk, and he looks like he belongs in the big leagues right now.
Yeah, that's who he is. He's going to strike out. He's not going to walk, and he's going to chase. Like that's just who he is. Not the only guy like that we're going to talk about tonight, but yeah, he can stay for sure. Like I've said before, it was a guy I paid zero attention to when he was in AA. Just felt like it was a minor league depth signing because who was going to play the infield, specifically the middle infield in AA? There weren't a lot of options, so figured, all right, this is just a dude they're bringing in, and even when he was in AA, it was just a dude. It was league average, a little below league average, and pretty much everything. You're like, yep, that's his role. That's why he was signed. And I don't know what switch was flipped. I don't know what magic Mike Monville performed down there in AAA, but shout out to him. We'll talk about him again later on as well. But shout out to him. Shout out to whoever worked with Jeremiah Jackson, gets credit there. It clicked. And yeah, he took off like a rocket ship in AAA, and it's been pretty well. I mean, you're looking at a 119 WRC plus, almost a one-WAR player, 5 home runs in 44 games at the major league level with the Orioles. As this part-time guy, they're moving around in the outfield. Of course, defensively, he's not maybe shining anywhere, but he can get the job done. And so, yeah, I think for the role that you want him to serve next year, I hope he sticks around, and I hope he's in an Orioles uniform next year.
Yeah, I think he will be. I think he kind of combines, I think I've said this before on here, but he kind of combines the strengths of a Ramon Arias with the strengths of a Jorge Mateo, minus the just pure speed, in the fact that he can, well, they're trying to get him to be able to play a corner outfield spot. He can play the infield. And yeah, what a season. A 93 WRC plus through 189 plate appearances in AA. And it's just like, yeah, I was not paying attention to him at all, and I pretty much pay attention to everybody. And he's just like, ho hum, let me go up to AAA, walk less, and go from 4.8% walk rate to 3.5, but strike out 5% less, from 16.4 to 11.7, double my ISO and double my WRC plus, and then make it all the way to the majors. And he still never has cooled off. His walk rate's actually 6.3% after taking a walk tonight. So I don't know, maybe that's like the last piece of the puzzle is, all right, here's what happens when you're aggressive and you're really trying to just impact the ball. Boom, you see the slugging percentage, the ISO goes up. Maybe now the trick is get him. Okay, now you know you can do that. Let's just not chase the very out of the zone pitches, because I think that's pitchers are going to go further and further out until he gives them a reason not to. So, yeah, I think he's not going to be like a starter for this team, but I don't see why he can't be a platoon infield, outfield, comes in against lefties, occasional starts against righties, bench player. Yeah, I think what a great find from just a minor league signing that nobody noticed when it happened to a guy you're penciling in as a bench player on I'm assuming is going to be a playoff contending 2026 team.
Go over to a different player now who had a much different season. It was really a tale of two seasons for Judd Fabian. From the beginning of the Tide season in late March up until late June, Fabian had a year that, by his standards and knowing the kind of player he is, could be considered a reasonable success. The batting average had been hovering in the 220s most of the time, strikeout rate in the high 20s, low 30s, but he was drawing walks. He was hitting for power, and the strikeout rate had made a big step forward after he whiffed 40.8% of the time in 30 games after being promoted to AAA in 2024. Then he goes on the IL on June 26. And this is the clear benchmark in Judd Fabian's season where things start to turn the wrong direction. After a 3-game rehab assignment with Aberdeen, he returned to Norfolk on July 29th. And leading up to going on the IL, in 65 games, Fabian had hit 221 with a 332 on-base percentage, 441 slugging percentage, and 12 home runs. From July 29th on, in 44 games, he hit 124 with a 309 on-base percentage, 204 slugging, and 3 home runs. Now, you look at the final numbers for Fabian this season, and they're a bit underwhelming. 87 WRC plus in 109 games of the Tides, 16.7% walk rate compared to a 31.6% strikeout rate, and a 183 batting average. With Judd Fabian's profile, and this is a profile he has had since his days at Florida, you know that he's not going to hit for high average. He's going to strike out a lot, but he's going to walk enough and hit for enough power that when you combine it with his center field defense, he's going to be a good player. That's the Judd Fabian we saw pre-injury this season. After he got back, though, he just kind of looked lost at the plate. So my question to you guys would really be, which Judd Fabian is the real Judd Fabian? And how does this affect the Orioles' decision of whether or not to protect him this offseason? Because this is going to be his first time Rule 5 eligible. For the first 3 months of this year, he looked like he had a really strong chance to be protected with a 40-man roster spot in the offseason. If not, make the major leagues before the season ended. But now we're sitting here after the conclusion of the season, and I don't know that I can say that that's the case anymore.
Will the first half Judd Fabian please stand up? I think that's the real Judd Fabian, because it was a wrist injury, I believe. I can't remember if he was hit by a pitch or just hurt it somehow. But my reason for thinking that the second half, basically just awful performance, is injury related is because pre-injury he was walking 14.5%, great, was striking out 28% around, pretty good, ISO 221, and then after the injury he's walking more, 20%, which to me says he's swinging less, 35% strikeout rate. And if he's swinging less, then he has to swing later. And with his swing and miss, that's going to lead the strikeout rate to go up. The ISO tanks to 0.81. His BABIP was also pretty low, 215 compared to 265 in the pre-injury days. But to me, it just seemed like the injury had him not swinging the bat as much, maybe not swinging with as much authority. Maybe they just figured, I mean, they had to know it was bothering him, but maybe they just figured, look, you're going to get your reps either way. We understand you're not at full capacity, but I think if he has a full off season to get completely healthy again, I would fully expect him to be back to that first half Judd Fabian, which is, again, not like this huge bat, but at least he had a 107 WRC plus. And when you combine that with legit center field defense with a great arm, that's a really valuable player. So hopefully that is the case, but that is my belief.
Yeah, clearly the numbers were dreadful this year, and I do think the injury is pretty valid. New dad, got the new baby as well. Just a lot there, but yeah, I think as a guy off the bench, you talk about the very good defense in center field, the super strong arm, someone you feel really good about as a late game defensive replacement. He's an athlete, like it's 60 grade speed, but he hasn't used that produce stolen bases over the last really 2 years. But like that's still an asset. Uh, I think what he does well, he does very well. 99th percentile walk rate in AAA this year. He doesn't chase, 83rd percentile in chase rate. He's going to force you to throw a strike. Now, when you throw a strike, it's a 70-30 shot. He makes contact on that pitch. But when he does make contact, it's 111 max EV, nearly 112, super high barrel rates. The pull side damage is pretty insane, well above average. The bat, I think, is as long as he can make contact, the bat can be like a late inning, game changing. You need an eighth, ninth inning home run. Judd Fabian can give that to you. So I do think he can be a valuable asset for you in the major leagues. Again, it was first percentile in zone contact rate in AAA this year. So yes, there are major questions like, is he going to make contact? But when he does, he can change the trajectory of a game late in the game. So yeah, we'll see what this offseason looks like. I am very curious. I know there was discussion like, all right, well, you got Judd Fabian or Reed Trimble. Do you protect one or the other? Do you protect neither? Like, do you let Judd Fabian maybe leave him out there and take the risk on not protecting him? We'll get into the Rule 5 stuff, I feel like, in a couple of weeks here. But yeah, I do think that makes for an interesting discussion. But I talked about this at the very beginning of the year. I think like nobody's expectations of Judd Fabian, I feel like has been like out of control. I feel like they've all been very managed and tempered. Like everyone understands who Judd Fabian can be. I don't think any of us foresee him ever being a everyday major league starter. And there's not even, I don't even think the splits, lefty righty splits, are even like that drastic of a difference either. So it's not like, oh, he can be like strong side platoon player either. But as a fourth, fifth outfielder, the guy who comes off the bench late in games, I think Fabian's potential, that's where his potential could shine. But yeah, there are some still major question marks, and the swing and miss I don't think is going to improve much at all. The strikeouts are still going to be there, but it's just when he does damage, it's extremely impressive.
Look, Jose Siri was just DFA'd by the Mets, but he had a really strong first 3 years of his career, and that's basically Judd Fabian without taking any walks. So yeah, a guy like that has really good value as long as he's cheap, cost controlled, and has options. He's especially going to be valuable to a team like the Orioles, especially if the injuries are going to keep happening in 2026 and into the future.
Before we move over to the pitchers, I just want to give you guys a chance to shout out anything else that you saw at the Tides lineup that was good or bad that stood out to you this year. And Bob, you just touched on the situation with Heston Kjerstad, and I don't know how much we're going to talk about Kjerstad tonight because, as you allude to, I think there's a lot of things that we don't know yet that are extenuating factors with Kjerstad. But you can look up and down the list. Reed Trimble getting 30 games in AAA after really losing a lot of time to injury the last several years was a real positive. T.T. Bowens put up good numbers with Norfolk this year. So what stood out to you guys?
I'd say those two guys, certainly. I mean, Trimble going to give Judd Fabian a run for his money as far as maybe getting protected on the 40-man roster. I think it's funny that Reed Trimble is actually a little bit older than Judd Fabian, which was kind of surprising when I noticed that. But it makes sense when you consider the injuries and everything. And T.T. Bowens, super solid first base depth to have at AAA. Great season overall, I would say. But my guy that surprised me was Silas Ardway, who we know is backup catcher capable defensively, kind of like a Maverick Hanley, if not better. But he actually performed pretty well, and he had a high BABIP, which helps out. But going from a 197 batting average in AA with a 662 OPS, where he had 12 doubles, a triple, 4 home runs, goes up to AAA and bats 258 the 791 OPS, 4 doubles, 4 home runs, continued to walk a lot. So shout out to Silas Ardway. I just want to see his BABIP was pretty insane when I looked earlier. Let's see what it ended up being. 345. So it came down. So a 117 WRC plus for a plus defensive catcher. Not too shabby.
Yeah, I just had those two, TT Bowens and Ardway. Same thing. Like Ardway is going to have a very long pro career. I think just the defensive abilities, the bat's never going to be like prominent, but like when you need him up in the majors, like I don't think that bat's going to be a black hole in your lineup. He's someone who I feel like Maverick Canley, like the contributions go pretty underappreciated every year, but they're pretty instrumental in being an asset to the pitchers in the system. And so when you need them to step up in emergencies in the big leagues, like they're going to give you every ounce of effort they have. And maybe their impact won't be something concrete that you can like point to in a box score, but I would bet if you talk to the pitchers, like who threw that night with them behind the plate, you get the real story of their impact. So he had a really good year with the bat, all things considered. And then, yeah, TT Bowens, just 79 games in AAA this season, a 112 WRC plus, 16 home runs, 30 total extra base hits in those 79 games. One of the hardest mashers in AAA this year. I think he has one more year of control before hitting minor league free agency. I think it's 6 years you get, I don't know, with COVID, and I don't know if you got an extra year for that or what the deal is there, but I think he's got at least one more year in the organization before he hits minor league free agency, unless of course he's on the 40-man roster. But if he's on the 40-man roster or if he's playing in the major leagues, then that means something very bad has happened with Adley, Basayo, Kobe. Unfortunately, luckily it looks like Basayo x-rays were negative. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's timely, all things considered. Pete Fairbanks is still an uber clown, but so you hopefully TT Bowens, like you don't want to see him playing first base for the Orioles because again, that group of first baseman DH they have there, but an undrafted kid out of Central Connecticut State who's clawed his way through the minor leagues, I hope he gets a game. I want to see him taking at bat, get that shot with the Orioles, put on that major league uniform. He's one of those guys who like you could very well see him like never getting that opportunity, but he's earned it. And maybe it's with another organization. If so, great. I'll watch, I'll cheer. But yeah, he had a really fantastic year, and he should be back in Norfolk next year again in that same role as an emergency option. You could do a whole lot worse. TT Bowens is pretty solid this year.
Absolutely. We'll go over the pitchers now. And if you've listened to our show in the last few years and you've heard us talk about AAA pitching, you've heard us talk a lot about the challenges that pitchers have adjusting to AAA and how that has heightened in recent years because of the change in the baseball and because of the strike zone differences between AAA and the other levels of the minor leagues. And I think if you look at the Tides pitching staff this year, you kind of see where those challenges came into play with some guys. Now, it doesn't tell the whole story of why some players struggled a little bit this year, which we'll get into. But you look at the pitchers that had good runs in AAA. Brandon Young was really good for the Tides over 5 starts. He had pitched in AAA the year before. Cameron Weston ended up putting together a really nice season. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, just kind of the hint of what's coming at the end here. But you saw him struggle a little bit in the early portion of the season. So the sense when you come away from AAA numbers for pitchers is that the ERA and the walk totals are inflated because of these challenges. And it felt like that was really the case this year for a Tide staff that had a collective team ERA of 5.05 and finished second in the International League in walks. So some struggles here, but there were some highlights. And I think perhaps most importantly, you saw the Orioles be aggressive with some pitchers who were deserving of a shot in AAA at the end of the year and were able to get that. And maybe Trey Gibson's numbers over 7 starts weren't great. Maybe Nestor Herman had one real clunker at AAA level, but it was still good to see them there. So there's a lot of directions that we could take this conversation in. And I do want to touch on the bullpen because I thought that there were some interesting arms there. But as you guys followed the Tides pitching staff this year, did you find yourself struggling with, okay, which pitchers are really struggling because there's some deeper issue versus there's a struggling because they're in AAA and this seems to be a systemic thing now?
Mostly the latter, I would say. But, I think also just there's better competition in AAA, and it's still not the same as the major leagues. I think that gap continues to widen, or at least has widened considerably over the last few years compared to before the COVID era when they shrunk the minor leagues. But yeah, I think it's a tough test when you go from using a complete, especially when you're promoted in the middle of the season, you don't have a whole off season to just work on a specific ball and learn how that functions with your grips and your spin and all that good stuff. So yeah, I think it's tough midseason, especially to go from using a completely different ball, completely different strike zone, automated balls and strikes, just a completely different environment. But I think these guys at least flashed enough to show that once they like we saw it with Brandon Young, from one season to the next, you make adjustments. In off season is a great time to get to a drive line or even just the Orioles lab at MedStar and just work on things and improve. So yeah, and I think just the innings are valuable and getting that experience in. Like Cameron Weston, 4.59 ERA, 135 innings pitched. I mean, that's pretty good. And yeah, his strikeout rate dropped from about 29% 24 to 22%. And the walk rate went from a 6.5 to 7.5 range up to almost 12%. But I think especially for him, I think that shrunken strike zone and the different ABS, whatever, I think that affected him a little bit more. He doesn't have any dominant pitch, but he's got the kitchen sink that he can throw, typically with good command. I actually expect him to be a little bit better if he gets a chance at the major leagues, maybe out of a bullpen role, but I think he could still be a back end starter. Trey Gibson, I mean, he was lights out all year, and yeah, strikeout rate dropped, walk rate rose a little bit in AAA, had a 7.98 ERA, but only a 5.03 FIP and a 3.80 xFIP. So some bad luck, as we've talked about, but good experience for all these guys.
Yeah, I think as far as like the prospects, quote unquote prospects, like these guys just got a couple of outings. And so I'm not taking anything away from Levi Wells. I don't take him much away, at least from Levi Wells and Gibson and Herman. These guys are already blown past their career high for innings by the time they get to AAA with all the changes, better competition, all of that good stuff. So it's just get up there, get your feet wet, get the experience, and you know what you got to work on for next offseason. I will pay a lot more attention come spring training and when they're back in Norfolk's rotation to start next year. If they're showing some of the same problems that crept up in their 4 outings, then we can have a different conversation. But yeah, Norfolk was led by Weston, who we're going to talk about in more detail later on. But Thaddeus Ward was second in innings. Like, okay, good job, buddy. Ronzi Contreras had a great year, but he's shipped out. Raul Alcantara logged. He had the eighth most innings on Norfolk's roster. He got released. Ragsdale, like just a lot of guys who aren't even in the organization anymore. Chase McDermott converting to the bullpen role. And of course, his outing he had in the big leagues, immediately going on the family emergency bereavement lists. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if anybody has said anything, but of course, wishing all the best to McDermott and his family. I don't care what happened in that outing. If he already had some bad news, knew something was coming, I couldn't even imagine stepping up on that mound. So I'm still super pumped for Chase McDermott next year, see what he can do out of the bullpen. As far as the starters go, outside of Weston, who we're going to talk about later, there's really nothing there. But the bullpen, yeah, I got 3 guys in particular who I think really, really stood out. One, I'm not sure what to make of. The other 2, I know exactly what to make of. But I guess I'll just throw it out there. Keegan Gillis, first of all, talk about him, get your guys' thoughts, because he was so dominant and we were begging every time he took the mound in AA. We were begging, why is this man still in AA? Of course, he came on our show this year. Shout out to Keegan. It was a great interview. But you look at his AAA numbers specifically. AAA was pretty brutal for him overall, but there were 2 sides. He had a first month and a second month. In the first month, 9 innings, an ERA of 10. The FIP was 6, so still not good there. 8% strikeout rate to a 14% walk rate. But the second month in AAA, 13 innings, a 1.35 ERA, 27% strikeout rate to a 4% walk rate. So big changes there. And I don't know. I pulled up the TJ stats cards and broke it down month by month and did the side by side. Like, he used the fastball a lot more in the second month and threw it for a lot more strikes, 40% in zone strike rate to 51% in zone strike rate for the fastball. So a big jump there. And he got more whiffs. The whiffs jumped from 11% in that first month to 27% in the second month. But other than that, like velo, spin, release, like everything else looks pretty much identical for the rest of his stuff. So I don't know what changed. It's not just he threw more strikes with the fastball and got that type of success, but so I don't know what exactly changed. I need someone smarter than me in terms of pitch design, development, all that good stuff to break that down for me. But he did have a much stronger second month. He is Rule 5 eligible. Could he be a sneaky guy that the Orioles add to the 40-man? I don't know. I could see another team saying, hey, this is a guy who's 6'8". He had a strong final month of the year. Let's take a shot and see what he can do. But I also see very easily why you leave him unprotected and he's back in AAA next year to see if he can build on that second month. I honestly don't really know what to make of his season though once he got to AAA.
Yeah, it is a conundrum for sure. I could see it. I don't know. I think it will say a lot what the Orioles do. Like I don't think it means they think he sucks if they don't add him to the 40-man roster. But if they do add him, I think that means that they like the changes or whatever they happen to be that we can't figure out that he made in that second month and feel like he can be the guy that he was in AA more than he was in AAA. So it's going to be interesting. This is a very, very big 40-man add offseason coming up. And even if he's not added to the 40-man, he might get taken in the Rule 5. He might not, but I mean, he might come back. So, I mean, it might be one of the guys like a Zach Pop where it's a risk they're willing to take because at the end of the day, is Keegan Gillis going to be the closer anytime soon in Baltimore or a super high leverage guy? I don't know about that. Maybe, but yeah, he's not. There's some other guys I think that could fit that mold a little bit better.
Yeah, and Gillis was teammates with two of them that I think are going to be competing to get 40-man roster spots, or have been competing to get 40-man roster spots in Anthony Nunez and Cameron Foster. But there's a reasonable argument for protecting Gillis because when you look through his game logs, and this is always where it's tricky with relievers because you can look at a reliever's numbers and think, oh, this guy didn't have a good year. And then you can just find these one or two clunkers that just completely throw off their stat lines. And Gillis had one real bad clunker, July 23rd against Lehigh Valley, 1 inning, 5 runs, 4 earned, 1 walks, no strikeouts, 6 hits given up. That was his 4th outing in AAA. A few weeks later, August 8th against Rochester, 1 2/3 innings, 3 runs all earned, 3 hits, including a home run with 2 strikeouts to a walk. And you look through the rest of his game log, and it's a lot of 1 inning scoreless, 2 innings, 1 run. You have a few 1 inning, 1 run outings in there, but not anything that's, really jumps out at you. But when you're looking at someone who is only throwing 33 1/3, right? Not even that, that's his AA totals. 22 1/3 innings at a level, one bad outing can really throw things off. So that's what's interesting with Gillis. I do think at the bare minimum, the Orioles have to protect him in the minor league phase. That's the absolute bare minimum they have to do because the Orioles lost a lot of players in the minor league phase last year, and I think that's going to happen again this year. And you don't want to lose someone who could be of use to you in the big league bullpen next year. I do think that if he is protected, that does not mean that he's going to be a candidate for a bullpen job right away, but that he's an optionable reliever that they think is worth having around they see some potential in. I think that's really what it's going to boil down to. And you could say the same with Anthony Nunez and Cameron Foster, which is why Gillis's case is so tough to pinpoint. But I don't think the Orioles would be off base protecting him.
No, certainly not. And just looking at Prospect Savant, they have all three of his pitches being at least average. The splitter is 99 on the Stuff Plus, and I think the fastball is 107 and the slider is 109. And again, like we've talked about recently, Stuff Plus isn't the end all be all, but it is a nice just to see the quality of the pitches. And then obviously you work on tunneling and location and all the other stuff on top of that. But I think he's got a nice baseline. We've seen the splitter with that high release be a nice weapon from a Felix Bautista. Obviously, he's not Felix Bautista, but he's a guy that could be like a mini mountain in a perfect world.
You're on mute, Nick.
You're muted.
There we go. Well, let's talk about Anthony Nunez and Cameron Foster, the other two arms that I really want to talk about here in Norfolk. Foster, I enjoyed very much when he first came over from the Mets. And now that we can look at his full body of work, like you just look at his AAA time specifically, I think there's a very high probability he gets added to the 40-man this winter. 4 offerings all got 50 grade or higher. Fastball average 95 with 6.7 feet of extension, 18 inches of induced vertical break, good chase and whiff numbers. It's like a 90th percentile fastball in AAA this year. 97th to 99th percentile in whiff rate, end zone contact rate, called strike plus whiff percentage, chase percentage, and K to walk percentage. Like just fantastic numbers. The cutter and his curveball were the second and third most used offerings. 49% whiff rate with the cutter, 43.5% whiff rate with the curveball. I'm very in on Cameron Foster and Anthony Nunez. Just like, I love the story. Again, just a reminder to anyone who, after the trade deadline, we talked about this, but he gets drafted by the Padres in 2019 as a hitter, is there for 3 years, goes back to college. He can't go D1 because he was a pro, but he could go D2 or below. So I think he went D2. But plays a couple of years there, converts to pitcher, gets signed as an undrafted free agent by the Mets, gets his feet wet last year with 10 innings, but this year was his first full pro season as a pitcher. He started in high A, he ended in AAA, 56 innings, a 2.06 ERA, 121 average against, a .81 whip, 83 strikeouts in 56 innings. Here, I don't know if I can see if I can show you this. Which can I share this? Share screen. Nope, can't do it. Okay, all right, can't do that. Anyway, I got Anthony Nunez as like his StatCast card. This looks like the electoral map of Wyoming. It's bright ass red everywhere and some faint blue here and there, like one faint blue line. That's about it. This is unbelievable. Like 96 mile an hour fastball. It's a one. You talk about Stuff Plus grade. Change up 107, slider 115, cutter 108. I mean, it's 97, 98, 99th percentile in virtually everything, except, yeah, hitters make a lot of contact against him in the zone. Okay. But, I mean, barrel percentage allowed 2.9% barrel rate against him. Hard hit rate, minuscule. The average EV was 86 miles per hour off the bat against Nunez. I mean, I can just go on and on. If I could show the image, apparently I can't. I would pull it up. We'll post it in Discord, post it on Twitter. It's unbelievable. This Nunez, this is a great find. And, you go back to that trade with the Mets and really all those arms that they acquired from the Mets outside of Aracena, a lot of them are Rule 5 eligible this offseason. And you figure when you look at it, it was Gregory Soto and Cedric Mullins who go over to New York. So, the quality that's going to come back isn't going to be great. So the Orioles went the Rule 5 route, guys who the Mets are probably much more willing to deal. And the Orioles nailed the guys that they targeted in those deals. They've shown nothing to the major league level yet, but I think both these guys, specifically Foster and Nunez, are going to definitely get that opportunity next year.
Yeah. I really like these guys, especially Nunez. Like you said, just whiff central. He's got 5 pitches. Like knowing the Orioles, I'm surprised they're not like, hey, you want to convert to a starting pitcher? But I think just with the lateness of becoming a pitcher and just the dominance he's shown, and the fact that Felix might not be ready next year, he legitimately could be like major league closer by the end of 2026 with his stuff and just how fast he's improved and yada yada yada. But yeah, huge Nunez fan, gets a lot of swings and misses. And Foster, he's really interesting. Great fastball, middling other pitches, but it's like a really, if you look at his pitch plot, it's like really vertical attack. It's like down, it's like from top to bottom. He can attack you, get you spun around with, and he really got better in his time. I think he had a 3.38 ERA since we acquired him from the Mets in his time with Norfolk, and it seemed like he just got better and better the longer he was here. So I think him and the Orioles, good mix. Would not be surprised at all if he's. I would not actually be surprised if he made his Orioles debut in the second half of this week. But I definitely think he's a serious candidate to be added to the 40-man, just like Nunez is a lock.
Yeah, I think both are legitimate candidates to be added. If I had to guess which one is more likely, I would lean towards Nunez because you look at his trajectory since he got back into pro ball as a pitcher. He has skyrocketed through the system. And Eric Longenhagen had written something up about him at Fangraphs that jumped out at me at the time of the trade, which is that when converted pitchers work out, they tend to work out immediately. And that seems to be the case with Nunez. And the numbers he put together this season in 2 different organizations across 3 levels were phenomenal. I think that he, I suspect the Orioles are going to be active enough in their bullpen this offseason that even if they protect him, he starts next year back in Norfolk. But I could see him getting a lot of big league innings next year and having that be a good thing. And with Foster, when that trade was done at the time, we had very limited StatCast data on Foster because he had had a couple of outings in AAA with the Mets in the first half of the season. And my impression at the time was, okay, the data is interesting even if the stats don't jump out at you right away. Let's see what he has. And the Orioles, and I think that this was a smart move, put him right in AAA and gave him a couple of months there to show what he has. And I was very impressed. I do think that, a lot of his pitch mix revolves around the fastball. I think that you both made good points there. Nunez has the deeper pitch mix, but Foster can consistently pump that mid to upper 90s. It has good movement. It's a really good pitch. And if this is a guy who, at worst, slots into an up and down role for you next year, he could be really helpful in that situation. So I think that both of these guys right now have very strong cases to be protected this offseason. And before we go into the awards for Norfolk, was there anything else in the pitching staff that stood out to either one of you guys, good or bad?
I got nothing. Just Cameron Foster was the only other name. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get to see Armbruster this year. I'm going kind of through. No, the Ciano Perez guy. I don't know who he is, but he looks like he got hurt. I know Bob's talked about this a lot lately. Like Carlos Tavera looked like he was really starting to show a little bit, and then I don't know what the injury was. He made some rehab appearances there at the end of the year, but really didn't get to see anything from him after the first month of the season. But yeah, they, at least with anything with this Norfolk rotation, the true starting pitching prospects came up at the end of the year. They made their appearance, but as far as the bullpen goes, like there's some real relief studs here to pay attention to.
I would like to shout out Alex Pham, who finally got a taste of AAA, and obviously very short sample size, only threw 63 pitches. But man, TJ Stats, his stuff is as good, if not better, than any of the other prospects. And maybe it's because he was in shorter stints and it was small sample size, but he had 5 pitches with better than 100 stuff plus between his changeup, his cutter, his curveball, his 4-seamer, and his slider. Best pitches were 4-seam, cutter at 108, changeup 107, slider 102, curveball 101. So that was a little surprising to me, and I like it.
We will go in now to our final segment of the night. Last call, brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing, located at 1421 Ridgely Street. Hopefully you've had some opportunities this year to enjoy Checker Spot at Oriole Park at Canham Yards. One of their signature beers, The Bird is a Word, was available behind home plate for pretty much all of this season. Their beers were featured elsewhere in the ballpark at various points and up close. They're right near Canham Yards, located at 1421 Ridgely Street. They're going to have a lot of fun events over the offseason, so be sure to check out their social media. And they are pretty much right in the shadow of M&T Bank Stadium. So if you go check out a heartbreaking Ravens game this year, be sure to stop by Checker Spot before or after the game. And now we will give out our awards for the Norfolk Tides this year. And as we have with the other affiliates in the Orioles farm system, we selected our hitter and pitcher of the year. And although I think it was tough for all three of us to decide on the hitter of the year, in the end, it goes to Samuel Basallo. While pitcher of the year, what was a little bit easier race, Cameron Weston gets the nod there. And we'll start with Basallo because for me, it was really, really hard to decide between Basallo and Beavers. I probably went back and forth on it 3 or 4 times before settling on Basallo, largely because what he accomplished this year, he did as a catcher, and he did at the young age of 20 in AAA. That was probably the separator for me, but I think you could have been justified in picking either of these guys. So, Bob, I'll start with you here. This was a fantastic season for Samuel Basallo. Very deserving of this award.
Yeah, like said earlier, just the dominance when he was on, when he was healthy, when he was in the lineup. I mean, I think I predicted he'd hit 30 home runs between all the levels. I don't think he quite got there. I'm checking my math here. He had 23 in the minors and then 4 more in the majors. So 27 home runs in 369 at bats. So pretty good right there. If he would have stayed healthy, he would have done it, but just absolute dominance when he was on the field. Yeah. Beavers was pretty close. Just the age and the position and the level of dominance that Samuel Basallo showed gave him the edge, but Beavers was no slouch, was really consistent, not quite to the level of Basallo, and obviously a little bit older, but a fantastic year in his own right.
Yeah, I mean, 23 home runs in 270 at bats. Beavers had 18 home runs in 70 more at bats. It was just, as far as like just, AAA hitter of the year, it was definitely between those two guys. And yeah, you consider the age, the position, and all that good stuff. Shout out to Samuel Basallo. And hopefully next year is a true breakout year, but at the major league level.
And for pitcher of the year, we went with Weston. And you could look at the Tide staff and say, well, this was the guy that was just the most consistent over the longest period of time. And that is true, but there were some positives to Weston's season that I think are really worth pointing out. 135 and a third innings pitched, led all Orioles minor leaguers in innings pitched this season. Combined, that was 133 strikeouts to 71 walks and a 4.59 ERA. I think some of the things we talked about tonight with pitchers struggling to adjust to the AAA baseball and to the strike zone probably came into play this season for Weston a little bit, but you look at the numbers that he put up this year, it was a solid year. And I think that if nothing else, this affirmed that this is a guy who can give you quality innings, and there's a clear path for him to get to the major leagues in, at very least, a bulk innings relief role and perhaps even a back end starter. I do think he will probably need a little bit more AAA time before he gets that opportunity. But overall, positive year for Weston.
Absolutely. I could see him being like Albert Suarez type, obviously a little bit younger, a little bit less of a journey to get there, but a guy who can be a long man out of the bullpen, maybe could play up in a shorter stint just with his mix of pitches, but also step in and start when needed. I do like, first of all, that he got the 135 innings. That's pretty big to build on. He also ended pretty strong from the month of August until the middle of September when the season ended, he had a 3.69 ERA over 39 innings pitched with 34 strikeouts. And if you go just in September alone, he got 3 starts, 16.2 innings pitched, 12 strikeouts. He did walk 10 batters, not great, but a 1.62 ERA. So, end of the year strong, go into the offseason and try to just continue to slightly improve. Try to get that walk rate down, even if the strike zone is smaller, and get that strikeout rate up a little bit.
Yeah, really great to see the 135 innings because he gets drafted in 2022. 2023 was kind of injury-riddled year. It only threw 43 innings. People started taking notice of him last year because he stayed healthy and pitched really well in the lower levels of the system. And this year, like you mentioned, the strong end to the year, his last start was 7 innings. I don't know if his last start is one of his final starts. So 7 innings, 1 run. Like, yeah, the walks were up, but like it's still overall strikeout rate, 22% strikeout rate for the year, which is well below the 28% strikeout rate. And the walk rate did climb up. It was almost 12%. And for his career, he's been around 8%. But I do think he provides good value as a depth starter. I think can log some good innings. But I agree that I think he does have a larger path to the big leagues as a reliever. And because he throws 6 pitches at least, if not 7 pitches. And they're pretty much all 50 grade offerings across the board, depending on which outlet you look at in their scouting grades. But I just think it's a very, I don't know if he has that offering that there's not that plus offering in his repertoire, but it's 6+ offerings, all 45, 55 grade. And you look at maybe he comes in after the starter, gets a couple lazy pop-ups, a couple ground balls, because the ground ball rate went down, but he still gets ground balls at a near 50% clip. He's got the unique arm angle. He's got the wide repertoire. If you need to go east, west, north, south, whatever direction you need a pitch to go in, he can throw that. And you look at some of his StatCast numbers and behind the baseball card stats. So what stood out to me is, the ERA, the walk rate, the strikeout rate maybe didn't pop this year, but he was 96th percentile in hard hit percentage, 82nd percentile in barrel percentage, and 92nd percentile in average exit velo. So when opponents did make contact against him, they really struggled to barrel him up and make quality contact. So I think that's promising. That's what I look at as potentially promising, especially in 1-2 innings. And, if he's on your major league roster and things get out of control early and a starter gets pulled in, second or third inning, he can help save that bullpen with 4+ innings a night if you need him to. But I do think he could provide a fun, little bit of a unique look in a relief role and get you 1-2 good, solid, quick innings and then pass it off to the back end of the bullpen. So we'll see if he gets that shot, though, if the Orioles decide to protect him this offseason.
Maybe a right-handed Keegan Aiken, but before he was used in high leverage since the trade deadline.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens with Weston in that Rule 5 consideration. And as is the case with a lot of players we've talked about tonight, that's going to be a topic of conversation going into the offseason. And for that does it for this week's episode. We will be back later on this week to break down our awards for the year. In the meantime, you can follow us on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member of our community today. You can sign up at the $3, $5, or $10 levels and have access to monthly top 50 updates, as well as much more bonus coverage throughout the offseason. You're not going to want to miss that. For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phil and Nick Stevens. And tonight we will give out our 2025 end-of-season awards for the minor leagues. We've been doing this for a few years now, and it's always fun at the end of the season to recognize the players and coaches who contributed to the Orioles farm system in meaningful ways over the past season. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into our first award, and that is Player of the Year. And in my mind, and I think in the minds of Bob and Nick as well, this was probably a 2-player race. And in the end, the winner is Samuel Basallo. He was a unanimous choice. All three of us had him as our first place candidate in this, and Basayo put up a phenomenal season in the minor leagues. 76 games with the Tides. He hit 270 with a 151 WRC plus, while belting a career high 23 homers, posting a 23.7% strikeout rate and walking 13.7% of the time. And as an added bonus, he did all of this as a catcher at the very young age of 20. In fact, all 428 of his plate appearances in AAA this season were against pitchers older than him. Of course, Basayo would earn a promotion to the major leagues in August, and within a few days of that, a long-term contract extension with the Orioles, becoming the first young prospect to earn a long-term extension from the Orioles in the Mike Elias years. So I know our expectations for Basayo were really high coming into this year. I think he exceeded any reasonable expectation. And on top of that, pulls out against very tough competition in Dylan Beavers. And I will say that in the years that we've done this award, there might have been deeper classes for candidates for hitter of the year, but I don't think I've ever had a tougher choice at the top than between Basayo and Beavers this year.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about these two just on the last episode, but you just look at the age, 23 home runs, only playing in 70 games down there in AAA this year due to some injuries. But yeah, Basayo, like you said, exceeded expectations at the plate and improved defensively as well. Glowing reports about his improvements back there. And yeah, I think rightfully deserved that contract extension, and hopefully he is a mainstay for years to come. And yeah, it's no slouch. Beaver season was no slouch. That is what he did this year. Like we talked about in the last episode, just none of us saw that coming. I think even best case scenario, he exceeded that, kind of what we were thinking, what he could become. So fantastic year for both of those guys. Again, just especially that first month of the year, I just can't get over what he looked like then versus what we're seeing at the major league level. So shout out to both of those guys. And yeah, it's, the Orioles gave it to Nate George. And like we talked about, if you're not including Basayo and Beavers because they're in the major leagues, I think Nate George is a really solid pick there. And mostly because like I usually, when we're doing these, I tend to not look at like prospect development, but I'll use that as like a tiebreaker. If there's two or three guys I'm trying to decide between, I'm like, okay, well, who developed the most as a prospect, right? I'll use that as kind of like a tiebreaker. Nate George, I don't know if there was a single prospect in this entire system, hitter or pitcher, who developed more as a prospect this year than Nate George. He's now top 100 worthy prospect after being a 16th round high school pick last year. So yeah, I think those were the top three, I think on all three of our ballots. Yeah, still pointing to hopefully a brighter future here in Baltimore. As we know, this year, hopefully it was just it was a dark cloud. It was a very dark cloud, but hopefully it was just a passing cloud.
Yeah, well said. I think, yeah, we just talked about it a lot in the AAA episode, but these guys coming up at the end of the year after the season really gave me, and I'm sure a ton of fans, a lot of hope for 2026, along with Kobe Mayo really ending the year strong, and hopefully the rest of the core guys getting healthy over the offseason and continuing to develop. But Basayo, just so dominant at such a young age, at such a valuable position, can play catcher, first base, DH, just going to hit 30 plus bombs a year, probably starting next year, as long given health and playing time. And Dylan Beavers certainly seems like at least a strong side platoon, getting 450 to 500 at bats in a corner outfield spot. Don't think you can ask for much more than that with your development system on a year-to-year basis.
Absolutely. And as Nick noted, we had the same three players in the same order on all three of our ballots: Samuel Basayo, Dylan Beavers, and Nate George. And we'll go over to pitcher of the year now, where it's a very similar story. As Trey Gibson wins the award this year, he was first place on all three of our ballots. And for Gibson, he became one of the pitchers this year to achieve something that had been rare in the Orioles system up until this season, which was pitching across three levels of the minor leagues and having it not be so much of a situation where it's tied to injuries at a higher level or spot starts here and there, but true development at play. Because Gibson began this season in Aberdeen And after 9 games, there was promoted to AA Chesapeake, where he was flat out dominant over 10 starts before earning a promotion to AAA Norfolk and appearing in 7 starts there. His final numbers for this season include a 4.26 ERA and 120 and a third innings pitched, with 166 strikeouts to 44 walks. He was also named the Orioles Jim Palmer Award winner, which is their minor league pitcher of the year, and he gets the honor unanimously for us. Nick, I will go back to you here to start. There's a lot of good that we can say about Trey Gibson's season, but where would you start?
I just think it's the 3 levels. It's the 166 strikeouts that led all Orioles minor leaguers. He's a top 100 prospect on he will be a top 100 prospect on multiple lists. I think at the start of next season. Just so many reasons that we've talked about all year to be excited about Gibson entering spring training. Just a really fantastic year that proved last year wasn't a fluke. That was the biggest thing for me, just like to zoom out even broader. Like a lot of the guys who had breakouts last year that we were so excited about, they came out this year and took another step forward. There were some injuries with some guys, but for the most part, a lot of these guys took that extra step forward, and Trey Gibson was definitely one of those guys.
Yeah, again, it's unfortunate that we just talked about a lot of these guys with the AAA episode earlier this week. But yeah, I mean, Gibson just absolutely killed it. And great point about, I don't know if any of the breakout guys, I'm trying to think. And we even had like Luis De Leon breakout big time this year as well. He could have been in the running for this, at least down ballot. A lot of the guys that broke out and we said, keep an eye on these guys. Well, they continued that and they got to AAA, AA, really raised their stock and got to the upper levels of the minors and continued to do what they did to get into that position. You got to love it. I just think Gibson was the workhorse. I mean, outside of Cameron Weston with his 135 innings, Gibson had 120 innings and huge strikeout totals, walk rate under 9%. You got to love it. Man, it's a great. We've been saying near the pitcher for a while now. I mean, we really called that to pat ourselves on the back. I mean, we saw this coming. People should have listened, but hey, they'll learn soon enough because next year there's going to be a AAA rotation full of really legit pitching prospects.
Yeah, and I'll shout out real quick. Just I had Blake Money number 2 and Nestor Herman third on my voting here. Just another opportunity to shout out Blake Money, because when you compare Money and Herman, both appeared in 23 games, both had 6 wins, both had a 3.93 ERA. Nestor Herman had 2 more innings, but they faced the exact same number of hitters this season. Money had a 29.8% strikeout rate. Herman was 28%. Money had an 8.4% walk rate. Herman was at 9%. So that's what gave me the boost. I went Blake Money number 2 there. A very dominant year for Blake Money.
Honestly, Money might have like the best pitch between the two as well with that curveball. So I didn't realize that they had such almost identical
Me neither.
lines, but Money was, I won't even say it this year.
Yeah, and when I started to dig into this for the awards, that really jumped out at me. I had a feeling that Money and Herman were at least in the mix for me, but I've been thinking the whole time, like, Luis De Leon will probably be the third guy on my ballot. It might be Levi Wells. It could be Michael Ferret. But the feeling, what I saw when I looked at Money and Herman, it's like they basically had the exact same season and almost the same number of innings. The difference is that Money struck out a few more batters and walked a few less. He had a fantastic season that I feel like flew under the radar a little bit. And I will note here that this is where we had some differences in our ballots because Nick and I had the same 3 pitchers in the same order. Gibson 1, followed by Money 2nd, Herman 3rd. Bob had Gibson 1st, followed by Herman 2nd, and Michael Ferret 3rd. And honestly, I don't think that that's a bad choice at all because you can make a case that Ferret, in the time that he pitched this season, was the most dominant pitcher in the farm system. 74 innings, 1.58 ERA with 91 strikeouts to 21 walks across 2 levels of the season. I think in this case, for me, it was just a matter of who was pitching for the full year. but Ferret was so good in the time that he had.
Yeah, I had to give him a shout out at third place. It was between him and Money for third, and I wanted to give it to him just because when he was pitching, he was flat out dominant no matter what. Between high A and when he got to double A, season was shortened a little bit, and obviously he missed some time in the middle of the season, but a combined ERA of 1.58 between the two levels, and it's not exactly fluky because his FIP was 2.37. Just ridiculous. 32.3% strikeout rate, 7.4% walk rate, batting average against of 154. And again, he's just 21 years old, a lot younger than a lot of these other guys, other than Luis De Leon again. But man, he's exciting. Like next year, he should reach AAA by the end of the year, and he'll be in the Trey Gibson spot, but maybe a little bit more upside even. So just ecstatic to have the season that he did, even with some injuries shortening it.
We'll go over now to our breakout player of the year. And again, it is unanimous with the top choice, though the down ballot choices were different. Our winner this year for breakout player of the year is Nate George. Now, George finished as the Orioles minor league player of the year. He finished third in our voting for that. But breakout player of the year, I think it was a clear cut choice to go with Gibson. 87 games across three levels. The 19-year-old batted .337 with a 10.3% walk rate, 16.8% strikeout rate, and a 159 WRC plus, while belting 5 home runs and stealing 50 bases. And I have to say that when you watch Nate George play, he plays with so much energy and intensity that he is just fun to watch. He could go 0 for 4 and still be a lot of fun to watch. But he wasn't doing that a whole lot this year. He was getting hits consistently. He managed to come on strong at the end of the year at Aberdeen. He pretty much hit the ground running at Delmarva and never slowed down after being promoted there from the FCL. So this was a year that I think even in the wildest expectations you could have had for Nate George, you would not have drawn up because it wouldn't have seemed realistic, but yet it happened.
Yeah, wow. I mean, Bowman Chrome baseball cards just came out. Nate George is one of the top cards people are chasing, which if you said that after last year's draft, it's like, huh?
How much are they going for already? Do we know?
We don't want to know. But yeah, that's pretty wild. Just to put a little bit of context to it, just huge breakout. And, they started him in the FCL, clearly was too good for the level. Moved him up to low A, didn't really slow down at all, was clearly too good for the level. Goes up to high A and struggles a little bit early on, but then really figures it out late. I think he ended with like a 139 WRC plus there at his age, 20, young 20 years old. That's pretty incredible. And I believe there was a quote saying that they had almost decided to just start him in Delmarva, but gave him the little bit of extra time. But either way, he's a guy that you realistically, as we talked about when we were recapping Aberdeen season, I believe, you could see him start at AA next year if he has an incredible offseason and spring training. So, yeah, at bare minimum, he's going to be another 20-year-old that ends 2026 in the upper levels of the minor leagues.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to add was I don't think it's crazy to at least ask, could he start the year in AA? And I think I've had 2 people ask me that, at least on Twitter, and it's like, I don't think you're crazy was my response, because he very well could. And so, yeah, just, no one saw this coming. Not a single soul saw this year coming. I'm pretty sure right after the draft, I had said Nate George was the most intriguing late round draft pick, not even the whole thing, but just looking at like day 2, day 3, I don't remember how the draft is set up at this point and what it was last year, but whatever it was, among the late round picks, he was definitely the most intriguing because there was so much unknown, but some real intrigue there. But yeah, even in my wildest dreams, I never imagined Nate George having this type of season. I thought maybe he makes some noise in the FCL and he flashes a little bit in Delmarva to close out the year. And then next year, we're talking, okay, could this be a potential breakout guy? And instead, he has this massive breakout already from year 1. So pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, like I said, I think when George was promoted from Delmarva to Aberdeen, if George had gone to the FCL, spent a full season there, and put up an OPS somewhere in the high 700s to low 800s, and maybe only played a few weeks at Delmarva or not played there at all, we would have thought that that was a successful season. And he blew that out of the water. And now I'll go to the rest of our ballots because this is where it gets interesting. We were unanimous in our top choice for the award, but our ballots were wildly different after that. I had Jeremiah Jackson second, followed by Braxton Bragg third. Bob had Aaron Estrada second, with Esteban Mejia getting his third spot. And then Nick had Levi Wells second and Aaron Estrada third. And now I guess this is where we should acknowledge that breakout can be highly subjective because I like with Aaron Estrada, like, okay, did he break out last year or did he break out this year? But you could really go any directions. And I think all of these choices are valid in their own way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think I'd have to go back and look, but I might have even had Estrada somewhere on my ballot last year for a breakout player. But to me, it's just he took another step. Like you saw reports of him hitting the ball 112 miles per hour. You're seeing Kobe Perez talking about he could be the next superstar international guy. Like you're hearing a lot of really, really positive things. And I think even was it Baseball America finally is coming around to the Aaron Estrada essence. He could be like that just pure hitter that can play all over the field. Probably not great anywhere, but passable, hopefully, to add a few spots. But the bat could be special, and he's only 20 years old. I think he's just vastly underrated still, but finally people are starting to catch on. But again, he definitely was a breakout player last year, but this to me was just like you went from the Frederick Ben Cosme breakout where it's like, okay, this guy went from just a name in the DSL and the FCL to a guy who's going to be in our top 50 and we're following along to a guy that's like, are we talking top 15, top 10 level prospect who could break out even further in 2026? So that was what gave him the edge for me.
Yeah, it's just you go back to last year and it is subjective, like what breakout means. And I think because we're following it super intently and closely as we do, we kind of, all right, this is a guy worth paying attention to. And then he has the year that he does with the power specifically. You're like, all right, he's on the map now. But I think this year was like a true breakout. When you get to AA at age 20 and you hit 300 with a 137 WRC plus, I think that's pretty solid. And yeah, I like the final quote from Baseball America in their write-up on Estrada was, quote, if Estrada can tighten up his swing decisions and find improved angles, he could develop into a star. That's Baseball America's words, not ours. But it confirms a lot of our praise for him, which is really good to see. So yeah, shout out to Estrada there. And yeah, I went with Levi Wells just because, I mean, you guys know I've been very big on Levi Wells from the jump, and he puts the shoulder issues he had last year behind him and goes from 60 innings, intermittent innings. He had like 2 months almost that he missed in between there, but from 60 innings to 95 innings this year in the year in AAA, slash the walk rate this year. Yeah, the first outing in AAA didn't go very well. He walked 5, slashing the walk rate, and then he walks 5 in his first AAA outing. But his last start of the year, he went 6 shutout innings, allowing just 1 hit. So I don't have too much concern about the elevated walk rate in 5 AAA outings. Again, he's climbing towards 100 innings. He threw 60 last year. So new strike zone, new ball, all the fun AAA hoops that we've been talking about. And yeah, to back that up with some more outsider point of view, go back to Baseball America and Jeff Pont specifically. He just the other week said Levi Wells has the potential for 4+ pitches, and Wells might be one of the most underrated starters in the minors. So again, more high praise from other national outlets as well for Wells and Estrada, which is good to see. And I considered Esteban Mejia, but the hype was off the charts for sure. I need to see more with Esteban Mejia, but I hope next year he is the runaway for pitcher of the year, a breakout star, and all of it next year.
Yeah, I think there was just a lot of really good candidates this year. Braxton Bragg for sure. If he would have stayed healthy, maybe given Nate George a run for his money. And Jeremiah Jackson, clearly breakout, but I was trying to stick a little more prospects wise. And Mejia, for me, clearly we knew who he was. We knew he had this potential, but just the effusive praise that Baseball America was putting on him. And then he did look pretty dang legit in the very brief view of that we got of him in Delmarva. Yeah, this is like that first step in the breakout, and he could come out next year and pull an Aaron Estrada where he's ends the season in AA and is looking like a total stud, or he could, take a little bit longer, go the Keeler Morphe path and stall out a little bit before hopefully getting back. But I wanted to give him a shout out since I saw that he wasn't on either of your guys' list.
At least a happy medium there. No more Keeler Morphe stallouts, please.
We'll go over now to our next award, and it's actually our last player-related award, and that is our Platinum Glove. And this year, our winner is Austin O'Verne, who appeared on all three of our ballots, but we had him in different places. I had O'Verne first, Bob had him second, and Nick had him third. He was the only player to appear on all three ballots, so he gets the nod here over Griff O'Farrell and Enrique Bradfield Jr., who both tied for second place. And with O'Verne, I think what we saw this year was why so many outlets came into the season saying this guy hits 270 grade tools. It's the defense and the speed. He can run down just about any fly ball in center field. And I know for myself that this award, when I was thinking about who to give it to, I was really down to four players. I was down to O'Verne, I was down to Griff O'Farrell, Bradfield, and Judd Fabian. And I think in the end, the reason that I went with O'Verne was the health factor. O'Verne essentially played a full season minus a week or so at the beginning of the year because of a hand injury, whereas Fabian missed a month with an injury. Bradfield is on the IL twice. So that's why I went with O'Verne. But I think that you had some really strong candidates in the mix here.
Yeah, I mean, this one was the hardest for me. Because there's no set criteria. We don't have defensive metrics. It's all eye test. That's all it is. Eye test and vibes. I'll just speak for myself and say, Griff O'Farrell gets dogged a little too much. I'll admit that. I don't want to speak for you two, but I'll speak for myself there at least. This is a chance to give him some flowers. I guess that he does deserve a little bit. And it felt like, especially at the end of the year, or at least the second half of the season, the highlight reel plays, there were a lot of them there for Griff O'Farrell. So I knew exactly what type of defender and player he was, having watched him so much at UVA. And yeah, the bat didn't live up to even modest expectations this year, although he did have a strong end to the year, but the glove really started to shine through for sure. And yeah, Fabian, O'Verne, Bradfield, it doesn't matter. I think I saw the Tides tweeted out that Fabian had, I think it was 12 outfield assists. I'm going off straight memory. I don't remember. But I think he led the organization in outfield assists this year. We've been watching him make those plays at the plate for 2 years now. They never get old. And it doesn't matter who you're talking about. I think we mentioned this last episode, but that potential Norfolk outfield of Fabian, O'Verne, and Bradfield, that's going to make that cavernous Harbor Park outfield look like a T-ball field. Lefties hitting at Harbor Park next year, you're not going to stand a chance. Between those three guys and the wind coming off the water, you're going to have to pull it into the picnic area. Otherwise, nothing's going to touch that outfield in Norfolk next year, if that is the starting outfield next year.
Yeah, the outfield defense in this organization is just on lockdown. Fabian, like you said, we've seen it time and time again. I put EBJ ahead of O'Verne, but it was very close. I mean, O'Verne I saw the eye test with Griff O'Farrell and O'Verne in the one game I was able to get out to at Aberdeen this year. They both were showing off. O'Verne with his cannon for an arm. O'Farrell, I think, is even better than I expected up the middle of the infield. But EBJ, that speed, the ability to go get the ball the way he does is just special. And they might be a year or two away from being factors on the Orioles in the majors. But once they are, if you have an outfield of Cowser in left, EBJ/O'Verne in center, Beavers in right, as long as he continues to improve, that's pretty good mix of offense and defense. But yeah, O'Farrell clearly the best infielder that I saw this year. Again, just the eye test, but outfield is a much tougher call.
And we will go now to our final award, which is Manager Coach of the Year. And as that award implies, it is not just the managers in the minor leagues are eligible for this award. Members of the coaching staff are eligible as well. And for the second straight year, Jordy Henry picks up this award. Henry, after guiding a very good Aberdeen staff in 2024 as the Ironbirds pitching coach, went up to Bowie this year and oversaw a pitching staff that struck out 1,269 batters, good for third in the Eastern League, while posting a 3.69 ERA as a staff. And what also probably helped Henry's case is that a lot of the pitchers that you were hoping were going to break out in AA this year did so. Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson, Blake Money, Braxton Bragg, Levi Wells all put up very good numbers. Plus, you had some good arms in that bullpen. So, has Henry perhaps benefited from having some good prospects on his staffs in the last few years? Yes, but he's also clearly gotten the most out of them. So I think he's a very deserving choice to win this award in back-to-back years. And Henry was first on Bob and Nick's ballots and second on mine. So pretty strong support for him.
Yeah, this one's difficult just because there's so many coaches, instructors, analysts, everyone who, the team level coaches, upper level coordinators, lower level coordinators, on and on, not to mention the managers who lead those entire operations. And, we don't have the inside information on how practices and team meetings and all of that are run, but I kind of view it as just like units. And when you look at units that stood out this year, I forgot that Jordy Henry won it last year as well for us. But you look at that Bowie staff. Honestly, I hated when the Bay Sox were at home because it meant you really couldn't sit and watch the pitchers. I need better feed down in Bowie. But, when they're at Erie and some of these other places who had great feeds, I mean, that's primetime viewing as far as minor leagues are concerned because of those arms that you mentioned. And a lot of guys that came up to high A at the end of the year, even though they're reaching their innings limits, their arms are getting tired. Luis De Leon, some other guys, they shoved to close out the year. So, yeah, that entire staff in Bowie was the bats not super impressive, as we talked about in the Chesapeake recap, but the arms down with the Bay Sox this year that was phenomenal to watch all year.
Yeah, coaching staff is the hardest one for me to pick. Just have no idea. Clearly, they're doing a great job. Just look at the breakout players, look at the development of especially the pitching staff. And they mostly at least pass through AA. So that's why I gave Henry the nod. And yeah, especially Luis De Leon, he got his astronomically incredible end of the season started in high A, but to really just keep it going, kick it into another gear when he reached AA to end the year. I mean, I got to give Jordy Henry at least some credit for that. And yeah, I mean, as long as the Orioles keep hiring people that can get the most out of these kids and continue to develop them, then we'll try to shout them out the best we can, even if we don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'll get into our ballots here because there were some interesting splits. Christian Frias, the FCL manager, received votes from Bob and myself. I had him first on my ballot. Bob had him second. Frias, by the way, won this award's equivalent from the Orioles organization. I had Aberdeen pitching coach Jeremy Howman third on my ballot, while Bob had Mike Montville, Norfolk's hitting coach, third on his ballot. Nick had Montville second on his ballot, followed by Casey Day, the pitching coach at Delmarva. And with that, now we will head into our final segment of the night. Last call brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing. Hopefully you've been out to Camden Yards this year and have had a chance to enjoy Checker Spot, whether it was getting the bird as a word from the beer stand behind home plate or checking out some of the other offerings that were available at various points at other stands throughout the ballpark this year. But just because the Orioles season is over doesn't mean you don't have the opportunity to enjoy Checker Spot's beers. Be sure to check out their social media for all of their events throughout the offseason. Of course, they're open 7 days a week over at 1421 Ridgely Street, not far from Camden Yards and in the shadow of M&T Bank Stadium. So if you head out to a Ravens game this year, be sure to stop by Checker Spot before or afterwards. And now for our last call segment tonight, this will be our opportunity to shout out a player that didn't win an award that we thought had a great season. And I think that Dylan Beavers is really the obvious choice here for what he did at Norfolk, but there could be some other guys as well. And I'll even give the two of you the liberty to perhaps shout out a guy that you couldn't find room for on any of your ballots, but that you thought very carefully about for an award, or you just thought in general had a great season. I'll start this one off with Nick.
Yeah, I went with someone who got no mention until we actually did just mention it, but he wasn't on any of our ballots for anything. But it's Luis De Leon, just because I would bet if you go back and look at our past years, this is what, year 4 of this. I think it's year 5 doing the podcast, but that first year we had no minor league baseball to talk about. How many of those years would Luis De Leon have won this award with the numbers that he put up this year? Just a really solid year. There were 9 Orioles minor league pitchers who had 100 plus strikeouts on the season. Luis De Leon had 107, and De Leon had the fewest number of innings of all 9 of those arms. He had 87 innings. Next on that list was Evan Yates at 92. So fewest number of innings among the 100 strikeout club by 5 whole innings. Walks have gone down a tick each year since 2023. And you look at just his 3 AA starts to close out the year, 16 innings, a 1.69 ERA, a 35% strikeout rate. So, yeah, phenomenal season by De Leon. And again, surprised to see him go to the Arizona Fall League, but I cannot wait to see what he does out there. And, of course, get some of those outings under the StatCast stuff, cameras, whatever it is. I just want to see the data from Luis De Leon. We've gotten peaks of it, but I'd like to get the full picture from De Leon because I think we will very much enjoy looking at those graphs and charts and all that good information.
Yeah, that's a great shout. He would be the pitcher for me. Hitting wise, I'd say Creed Willems deserves a shout out just because consistently solid season all around for a 22-year-old catching prospect in AA. And then we had a bunch of newcomers between the MLB draft and the trade deadline. I'd just like to shout out Wellington Arcena for being, like, to me, the most impressive of that bunch and seeming to have the highest ceiling potentially of the guys that were received, at least at the trade deadline. Not talking about the top end draft guys.
Yeah, those were good shout outs. De Leon was actually in consideration for me for a down ballot spot for pitcher of the year. I thought he had a phenomenal year, and you're right, Nick. There's a time in the not too distant past where De Leon would have won this award, and we would have been really happy about that. I thought that the 2025 draft picks stood out. I thought that a few players that came over at the deadline really stood out this year. I will say, though, that if we had a comeback player of the year, which is not something I think as a minor league podcast we should have, but if we ever wanted to institute one, Reed Trimble would have been the runaway winner for me this year. And I don't want to get too excited about it because Trimble has been hurt so much in the last few years. But to run off some of the numbers this season, 4 levels, although some of that was rehab time, so it's primarily just 2 levels, AA and AAA this year. 17 home runs, 827 OPS, 21 steals, and 21 attempts. He ends the year with a really good run at AAA, and I think has played his way legitimately into the conversation to be protected with a Rule 5 spot because you saw flashes of what makes him such an interesting prospect this year. A little bit of power, some speed, good versatility, can cover ground in the outfield. I don't know that his ceiling is particularly high, even if he can stay healthy going forward, but he could at least be good outfield or utility depth. And I'll just throw this stat out because it's one of my favorite stats in the Orioles farm system, and I like to talk about it when I get the chance. In 5 seasons of minor league play, granted, because of the injuries, it's only been 226 games, but in 5 seasons of minor league play, Reed Trimble is 61 for 61 in stolen base attempts. He has yet to be caught stealing as a pro.
That is a phenomenal pull. And yeah, just to see this was the Reed Trimble that 2 years ago, envisioned seeing perform when he get drafted out of Southern Miss. And it's just been so many like gruesome injuries that he suffered and major surgeries. And so, yeah, to see him coming back, I thought about if we were going to exclude Basayo and Beavers, as far as like hitter of the year is concerned, Reed Trimble is definitely going to be in my top 3.
And for that does it for this week's show. We will be back next week to break down all the latest news in Birdland. Probably going to be focusing on recaps of the Major League season, and perhaps we're discussing about some of the key decisions the Orioles are going to have to make with their personnel this offseason. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to patreon.com and sign up to become a member of our community today. You can join to $3, $5, or $10 levels, have access to member-exclusive chats in our Discord, monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list, including our October update, which is going to drop next week, and bonus coverage throughout the offseason from Bob, Nick, and myself. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.